Hey, Steve from GuitarZoom here, and today we're going to be doing is trying to simplify your understanding of what modes are and how they work. Okay? Now, modes can get very, very complex. There's a lot of things that we can do with the concept of modes. But the problem for a lot of students is, a lot of players, is that they get confused right away, and then it just makes the whole thing really, really complicating. And what I want to do is just give you a couple of different ways to think about modes to simplify this whole process. But you have to kind of follow me all the way through this video so this all makes sense to you. And I would strongly suggest that two things. Number one, you can always write down notes for yourself, things that you can study or things that you're learning. And the second thing is write down things that you think would be beneficial for you for further learning, further training in your guitar journey. Because there's a lot of things that you could learn how to do. Now, I'm going to make this as easy as possible, which means I'm going to have to skip some steps that might be really important for you to study more, maybe some theory topics or different kinds of things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do in order to understand modes is we need to understand the diatonic scale, which is the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale, the major scale. But in order to do that, what we need to do is take a step back and understand what's called the chromatic scale. Okay? Again, it's all very important and it's all fairly simple, and I'm going to try and make it as easy as possible. So basically, the chromatic scale is all the notes in music. That's what it is. So no matter what instrument you play, you only have so many notes that are available to you. If you were looking at the staff in music, you only have so many notes available to you. Okay? So let's start there. If we were looking at a piano, for instance, we would see white keys and black keys. Now, the white keys, the notes on the piano would be A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And then it starts all over in what we call an octave, which means we start all over. We go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and so on. So there's no L or Q or R or W in music. It's just A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Those are your notes, okay? And then we have these black keys. Now, the black keys, if we, again, simplify this as much as possible, if we have the white keys C and D, and in between that is a black key, we call that black key C sharp, or we call it D flat. Now, C sharp and D flat are the same thing. We call that an enharmonic, which means two notes or two names for the same note, enharmonic, C sharp and D flat. So we could call it either one of those things. If we go to F and G, there's a black key in between, so we call that F sharp or G flat. We can call it either one of those things, okay? But there's a couple of spots on the piano where there is no black key in between. For instance, between B and C, there is no black key. So we don't have a B sharp or a C flat. We also have E to F. There's no black key in between there, so we don't have an E sharp or an F flat. All right, so the shortcut here is simply this. Remember the word B, B and E. B doesn't get a sharp and E doesn't get a sharp. And let's just talk in terms of sharps right now because it just makes things a lot easier when you first start. We know that a flat is the opposite sharp, right? We understand that. But just for now, let's just talk in terms of sharps to make things nice and easy. So our notes would be A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and then it would start all over in an octave and keep going. Now, somebody's going to argue at some point in the comments that there is such thing as an E sharp or there is such thing as a C flat, and what they're referring to are certain keys that we wind up in. Okay, that's further down the line, and that's just going to confuse you in the early stages of trying to learn this. If we look at the piano, we can see by looking at the piano that there is no black key in between B and C. So for now, let's understand that there is no B sharp or C flat to make this easier for you. And then if you want to make things more complex as you keep going, I think that's great. All right? So all we have to remember is A through G, everybody gets a sharp except for B and E. Okay? Now, with that information, we could learn about all our keys and all kinds of different things, but we're not going that direction. We're going to keep going into what we call the diatonic scale. Okay? So what we do when we get to the diatonic scale is we're going to pull 7 of those notes out of that chromatic and create this diatonic scale. Okay, so the chromatic scale is kind of like the dictionary. It has all the notes. It's not really there to give us music from itself. It gives us words to create sentences, which is what keys are. Okay, so what we want to do is take those notes out. So again, just making sure you understand this. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, octave. When we go to the next A on the piano and keep going, we call that another octave. When we get to the next A and we keep going, we call it another octave. So as we keep going up or we keep going down, those are octaves. They're not new notes. They're the same notes, one octave higher or lower. Okay, so that's how this works. Also, the last thing I want to say about that is I'm starting on A simply because our alphabet starts on A. Okay, but in music, A isn't any more important than B or C or D or E or F sharp or anything like that. In a chromatic scale, they're all important. Okay, I'm just starting on A because that's where our alphabet starts. Now, for our example, we're going to start on the note C. And the reason being is we're going to be utilizing what we call the key of C major, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Okay? And the reason why we're doing that is because the key of C major has no sharps and no flats, so it'll make it an easier conversation for us to begin with. Okay? So, if I go to my guitar now and I go up to C, I can play C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now you might have played the C major scale before, and it's okay if you haven't, or if you've played it, maybe you play it here. Right? There's a lot of different places around the guitar you can play the C major scale, but the point is you can hear that it sounds like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And the notes that I'm playing are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay? So, the major scale is kind of like the origin of all music theory. Okay? The chromatic scale gives us all of our information, it gives us all of our notes. But the actual music theory comes from this do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do major scale. Okay? So, I'm going to tell you a false story here, but it's going to reinforce what I'm trying to explain to you. So, let's say we go back in history all the way back to sort of a Gregorian chant thing where a bunch of guys are sitting around and they're singing, oh, together, right? They're all singing in unison. Everybody is singing in unison, okay? And what they're singing is the major scale, okay? So again, I'm telling you sort of a false story here, but you get the idea. So they're all singing these notes. Okay? So they might be singing something where they're going, and they're all singing that together. Okay, so they're all singing it, it sounds great, and they're like, well, we need to do something different. So the first thing they do is they say to themselves, well, why do we have to be in the key of C? Why can't we be in a different key? All right? So they say, well, what if we wanted to be in the key of A? Okay, let's do that. Now, as guitar players, the beautiful thing is we can take everything that we're learning how to do right here, this C major scale, again, whatever shape you're playing, however you've memorized it, and I could take that exact same thing and I can simply move the entire shape that I'm playing down to A and play exactly the same thing. Now, if I move down to A, of course, the notes I'm playing are going to change. You can see the shape that I'm playing stays the same as I move around. Now, why is that? It's because in order for this to be the major scale, it needs to have the same intervals or distances between each one of the notes. All right, so let me show you this. If I go up to C here, C to D is a whole step. D to E is a whole step. E to F is a half step. F to G is a whole step. G to A is a whole step. A to B is a whole step. And then B to C is a half step. Now again, to make that very easy, here's how you think about it. If you're in a major key, if you're in the diatonic, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale, the entire scale is whole steps except between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. So shortcut number 1 is when you're in the chromatic scale or you're using all of the notes, there are no black keys in between B and C and E and F. There's no sharp between B and C and E and F. which spells the word B, B and E. That was our first one. Now, it's that when we're dealing with the diatonic or major scale, it consists of all whole steps except between the 3rd and 4th and 7th and 8th. 1, 2, 3, 4 is a half step. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is a half step. Right there. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just playing that note on a different string, obviously. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So with that idea then, if I move this down to the key of A, I need to maintain the half steps and whole step relationship. So half steps everywhere except between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or 1, whatever you want to call it. It's an octave. And that's why it works really well on guitars, because you can actually see it. The shape stays the same no matter where you go. So that's changing keys, that's transposition, or whatever you want to call it. The beauty here is that you could play the scale before you'd even know what the notes are. But the nice thing about that is if you wanted to play in the key of A, you can now define what notes you're playing. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, and A. It's got to mirror the key of C. Think of the key of C as being like the ultimate. It's correct. It's the catalyst. So if I want to play in the key of, B, I'm going to do exactly the same shape. Or the key of A. Or the key of G. Okay? So you could play the shape and then you could figure out what the notes are. Now, obviously, at some point it might be nice to know your key signatures and what notes are in all the different keys and all that sort of thing. But I don't want to go off in the weeds. I want to stay where we are. So we've built the chromatic scale, and from that we've built this diatonic scale, which is a series of half steps and whole steps. And we could play this in any key we want. But for our purposes, we're going to stay in the key of C, which doesn't have any sharps or flats. Okay? So, again, back to our Gregorian chant people. So they're doing their thing, and now we're moving around into different keys and like, oh, that's pretty cool. But after a while, they get bored with it because they're like, well, we're just playing the same notes over and over and over. Okay? So what they did next was they said, okay, so let's try and make some chords. Okay? Instead of just everybody singing the same pitch, let's start singing harmony. Okay? Now I'm going to take a big jump here, and I'm not going to explain how harmony works because that would be a lesson in itself. But I do want you to get the ultimate end game of what this is. So if we were in the key of anything, it doesn't make any difference. A major scale. We're in a major scale. Okay? You are going to generate 7 chords because each one of those notes are going to get a chord. So it doesn't matter if you're in C major or A major or G major or F major or F sharp major or whatever, you're always going to get this chord sequence. And again, I'm going to go back to the key of C to keep this easy. In the key of C major, your first chord would be major. And it is. Just like if you were in the key of A major, obviously your first chord would be A major. If you were in the key of G major, your first chord would be G major. It's not going to be minor in a major key, right? So that's the obvious part. Now, the rest of this, you just have to trust me, because I'm not lying to you, but you could figure out the whys a little bit later. So in the key of C major, our first chord is C major. Our second chord is D minor. So the second chord is always minor in a major key. The third chord, which would be the note E, would be E minor. So your first chord is major, your second chord is minor, your third chord is minor. Your fourth chord is going to be major. Your fifth chord is going to be major. Your sixth chord is going to be minor. And then your seventh chord is what we call diminished. Now, we'll get to that in just a second here, and then we're back on C major. So again, I'm going to give you another shortcut. When you're in a major scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, it doesn't matter the key. It doesn't matter if you're in the key of G, A, C, anything you want. The 1, 4, 5 chords in that key are going to be major. The 2, 3, and 6 chords in that key are going to be minor. And the 7th chord is going to be what we call diminished. Now, the diminished chord isn't a chord that we use a lot in popular music, and when we do use it, oftentimes we don't really use it in a correct way. We just use it because we like the sound of it. But that, again, is another conversation. We're going to stay on this mode conversation. Okay? So what that tells us is if we're in the key of C, we'd get C major, F major, and G major, because that's the 1, 4, 5 chords. And we'd get D minor, E minor, and A minor, which is the 2, 3, and 6 chords. So you get these 6 functional chords. Now, if you've played any music before, you've encountered this, because if you're in the key of G, for instance, what chords have you played many, many times before? And you're probably going to say, oh, G, C, and D. Well, think about it. G would be the 1, C would be the 4, and D would be the 5. Or you might have said, oh, G, C, and D, but I see A minor a lot. Sure, E minor. E minor would be the 6th chord. But if you played A minor a lot in that, then that would make sense too, because A minor would be the 2 chord. So we can learn this theory too and help us with learning songs by ear, reinforcing our confidence in what songs, what key a song is in and what chords we expect to see. Think about if you were at a bonfire or something like that, or a campfire of some sort, and people are sitting around playing acoustic guitar and they want you to play, and you're going to play these campfire songs. They're going to be based off of all these things. What you don't know is what key somebody's going to play in. But if they say, oh, it's a 1, 4, 5 in the key of G or the key of A or something like that, or even if they don't tell you, but you look at them and, the first chord is A, you can immediately start thinking in your head, well, what are my chords here? Well, 1, 4, 5 would be major, 2, 3, 6 would be minor. 7th we're probably not going to be dealing with. So we have A major, B minor, C sharp minor, D major, E major, and then F sharp minor. And you could look right on your guitar and figure it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So again, might be a theory thing where you're going, wow, that's pretty amazing. I don't quite understand it. I'm going to trust Steve at this point, but maybe that's something that I should study. Okay, so let's go back to our Gregorian chant people. So now they're started singing in harmony, which is pretty darn cool, okay? So they're singing in harmony, and now they're moving around keys and everything, but they've come to the same conclusion. We're still just doing the same stuff. This harmony thing was really great because, if I was singing the note C, maybe somebody else is singing another note of that chord, which is how this works. But it all still sounds happy in major. So here's the kicker. Somebody came along and said, what if we were in the key of C, using the notes of C, using the chords of C, but we emphasized a different chord? Meaning we're going to be in the key of C, but we're going to choose a different chord to make home plate, for instance, okay? So we're going to use those same notes and everything, but we're going to try and emphasize something else. And think about this, because this is what modes are. This is how the theory works. So they chose the 6th chord. Now let's be in the key of C. So the key of C, we've got the 1 chord is C major. The 6th chord would be A minor. Now, why did they choose the 6th chord? Well, let's just make an assumption here. The notes of the chord C are C, E, and G. The notes of the A minor chord are A, C, and E, and it's okay that you don't know that, but I want you to identify that they're using 2 out of the 3 notes together. C, E, G, and A, C, E, they're sharing C and E. And if we even look at this chord, we can see that they are kind of the same. They are similar in shape and in the notes that they're sharing. So, in traditional piano music, if you learned how to play piano, for instance, when you were a kid, you learn what's called relative major and minor. So that's where this whole trip starts, is relative major and minor. And what relative major and minor says is there's a major key and there's a relative minor key to that major key. What does relative mean? It means it uses the same chords and it means it uses the same notes. So the relative minor is the 6th chord in a major key. It always is. It always is. And that's ironclad. You want to learn that. So if you're in the key of C, the 6th chord, C, D, E, F, G, A, the 6 is minor. So A minor and C major are relative major and minor if you were learning how to play piano, for instance. Okay, they call that relative major and minor. I'm going to change the wording just a little bit for you to try and make this make even more sense. Let's not even think of them as being relatives. Let's think of them as being the same thing. Okay? In the key of C, your notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. Your emphasis note is C. Your emphasis chord is C major. Relative minor is just saying we're going to use everything that the key of C gives us, but we're going to emphasize the note A and the chord A minor. That's all that's happening. Okay? Now again, further down the line, when you learn deeper, whatever, you could try and argue something, but the truth is that is the truth. Okay? A minor isn't a different key. It is the key of C. But you've chosen to emphasize the sixth chord, A minor, instead of C. Now let me show you an example. So let's say we're playing in the key of C and I'm playing C, and then I go to F and G. So that's going to be my chord progression, a 1, 4, 5 in the key of C. Now, if I wanted to be in the relative minor, I would want to use all the chords that I want to use. I don't have to use everything. I can use whatever I want from C major, but I want to make it sound like A minor is home plate, like in baseball. That's what I want to get to. That's what I want to push my song toward. So let's, instead of playing C, F, and G, I'm going to play A minor, F, and G. Now, we could call that the key of A minor, and that's absolutely true. But what we really want to understand is if we say the key of A minor, what we know is we're really talking about the key of C major. But we're emphasizing the sixth chord. So when somebody says, oh, we're in the key of D minor, don't panic. Think about what's the relative major. If we're in D minor, we're really in F major. Or we're in whatever, B minor. What does that mean? Well, B minor means we're really in D major. Because remember, if we say minor, we're talking about the sixth chord. It's very important to understand that. Okay? So then you can relate it back to the major, and maybe that helps to set up your fretboard. Maybe that helps to know what chords we'd be dealing with, all of that sort of thing. As opposed to thinking about the minor as being a completely independent and separate key, you could think about minor as being just the sixth chord of whatever major that we're dealing with. Okay? So the nice thing about this is if you've learned pentatonic scales before, you might have already encountered this, because oftentimes when we teach pentatonics, we think, oh, A minor is here, and C major is here. Well, obviously C major and A minor are sharing the same notes. They're exactly the same thing on the guitar, except what the emphasis note, we could maybe call it the starting note, but I don't really like to think of it as starting note because we don't always start on the C when we're playing songs, right? But it's our emphasis, it's our home plate. So now let's think about that in a real world situation. If I took A minor, F, G, okay, and C, F, G, and I wrote a song. So my song, what I'm going to do is in my verses, I'm going to play A minor, F, G. So the A minor is being emphasized. And in the chorus, I'm going to play C, F, G. And why am I going to do that? Because it's going to make the chorus have a lift because of that major key sound. So if I did something like this, then we get to our chorus and I do this. Then back to my verse. You see, I have never left the key of C, but we could argue that in one section I'm emphasizing the C chord, therefore I'm in the key of C. In one part I'm emphasizing the A minor chord, therefore I'm in the key of A minor. Or we could just say we're in the key of C the whole time, right? So that's where the confusion comes in. What I'm saying is the argument really doesn't make any difference. It doesn't. You could argue with the semantics of it if you want to, but the truth is, you still never left the key of C at all. So it's important to understand that, because now, if we go back to our Gregorian chant folks, okay, they've now figured out that they could sing in the key of major, C major, or now they could sing in the key of A minor. And it gives it a completely different sound because it's got this dark, sad, somber kind of sound when we're emphasizing a minor chord versus a major chord. And they could do that in any key. They could go down to the key of G and emphasize the 6th chord, and it would get the same thing. They could go to A and emphasize the 6th chord, and they'd get the same thing. The 6th chord's always going to give them a minor sound. So this lasted a long time and made everybody happy because now we could sing in a major key or a minor key, right? Even though we weren't changing keys, we're just emphasizing a different chord, the 6th chord. So somewhere along the line, somebody said, hey, if we can emphasize 1 and we can emphasize 6, why can't we emphasize 2 or 3 or 5? Why can't we emphasize those? And the answer is, you can. That's what modes are. The difference is in the title, because we could generically say major, and you knew I was talking about the 1 chord. We could generically say minor, and you knew I was talking about the 6th chord. Well, if we're going to be in the key of C, for instance, and we emphasize the 2 chord, the 2 chord in the key of C would be D minor. Remember, 1, 4, 5 are major, 2, 3, 6 are minor. So the 2 chord is minor. Well, if we call it minor, then if I say, oh, we're in D minor, well, isn't that going to screw everybody up? Because everybody's thinking D is a 6th chord. Because the generic terms, major and minor, mean 1 and 6. So we couldn't do that anymore. If we wanted to emphasize the 2 chord in the key of C, which is D minor, we couldn't just call it minor, because it would confuse everybody. So we have these names, these crazy names. Okay, Aeolian means 1. Most people don't say Aeolian, they just say major. I'm in the key of G major. And they don't even say major, I'm in the key of G, or the key of D, right? That's what we do. The 2 chord is called Dorian. Dorian is a fancy way of saying the 2 chord in a major key. So if you say D Dorian, all you're really saying is, I'm in the key of C, but I'm emphasizing the 2nd chord of the key of C. Okay? Here's another really important thing, because as guitar players, we're always thinking about scales, like soloing. Okay? These modes that we're talking about are defined by the chords, by the rhythm section of the song. Not just what you're choosing to do as far as a solo goes. Okay? Your audience doesn't understand all of this stuff. Okay? So, I mean, we'll get to that in a second, but it's very easy to go down this crazy rabbit hole where you're like, well, if I play this note, then I'm in this mode, and if I play this note, and I'm in this mode, and I'm... No. You're in the key of C. Right now, we're in the key of C. If I emphasize the 1 chord, I'm in the key of C, emphasizing the C chord. If I emphasize the A minor, I'm still in the key of C, emphasizing the A minor chord. But we can call it A minor to make everybody happy. That's fine. Okay? But if I emphasize the 2 chord, I need to say Dorian. And Dorian is just stating, hey, you're emphasizing the 2 chord in whatever key you're in this case, the key of C. The 3rd chord, which is minor, is called Phrygian. So if you emphasize the 3rd chord in the key of whatever, in this case the key of C, you're in Phrygian. So if I say E Phrygian, you can think E, D, C. Oh, I'm in the key of C. Sets up my fretboard, tells me everything I need to know about my notes, my chords, everything like that. But it's also telling me E minor is my main focus. The notes of the E minor are my main focus, my priority when I'm soloing, doing whatever, right? And again, we're going to come back to that in just a second. But that's what it is. So it's really that simple. When you say Phrygian, you mean the 3rd chord in the key of whatever. So Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian. The 4th is Lydian, which is major. The 4 chord is major. So if you say, C Lydian, you're in the key of G, but you're emphasizing the C chord. Mixolydian is the 5 chord. So Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian. And then your 6th chord is called Aeolian. Now, most people just say minor, right? But we gave it a name, which is Aeolian. All right? And then we've got our 7 chord, which is our diminished, which we call either Locrian or Locrian. You can call it either one of those. Okay? So again, we've got these crazy names that are really just telling us what chord it is that we're trying to emphasize. It's very important to understand that. Now, here's where the confusion comes in. There's 2 different places that the confusion comes in. Number 1 is where to go on the guitar. So let me explain something to you. If I go here to C, and I play from C to C, I'm giving the tonality of C major, right? If I do the exact same thing, but I start on the note A, and I play the same thing, I can make all of the modes in one spot on the guitar. See, the confusion I had when I was a kid and I was trying to learn this is somebody was trying to teach me that you have to move down to this position to be in Aeolian, in minor, and you have to move down here to be in Mixolydian, and you got to move here to be in Lydian. And so I learned these shapes as different names, and I was so confused. And here's what I want you to understand. If you've learned solos before, if you've learned scales before, you might have started with pentatonic, right? Well, when you learned your first pentatonic scale, for instance, again, it might be different than mine, but if you learned this one, we called that the first position or first box of A minor pentatonic. And then you learned this one. We called that the second position or second box of A minor. We were still in A minor. We didn't call that something else. It was just playing the same notes higher up on the guitar. And then the next position was the same notes higher up on the guitar. So the first big confusion for guitar players, obviously, is understanding modes, which we already talked about. But the second thing is applying it. You don't have to move to some other position. If I'm in the key of C major, my entire fretboard, ideally, I want to be able to visualize my entire fretboard as C major. That's what I want. Okay? If I'm in C major, but I'm emphasizing the 6th chord, which is A minor, I'm still visualizing my C major chord across the fretboard. And I can still go wherever I want. Right? The difference would be the notes that I'm trying to visualize, the chords, the triads, the arpeggios, whatever you want to call it, that I'm trying to visualize across the fretboard. That might change a little bit, obviously, because if I'm emphasizing an A minor chord, then I want to start maybe trying to see some sort of A minor idea across the fretboard, okay? Or if I'm emphasizing the 2 chord in the key of C, which is D minor, then I might try and visualize the D minor chord or the D minor arpeggio or whatever you want to think of across the fretboard. But I'm not stuck in like a position somewhere on the guitar. I want to be able to visualize. This is why I always try and teach people to go back to just the 1 chord. Go back to the major. Because then you can think about all the chords that you have. You can think about the positions that you've memorized, the fretboard. And it's all sitting there. It's all laid out the same way. You know, D Dorian and C major are the same thing in terms of their notes and in terms of their chords. The difference would be emphasis, right? So that's myth number 1 I want you to understand is don't think, well, if I'm in A Aeolian, A natural minor, I got to be here. But if I wanted to play in G major, well, I got to be here. Or if I want to be in whatever, you can be anywhere. That's how guitar players try and see the fretboard. You tell me a key, you tell me the key of G, that doesn't mean I got to go here. I could be up here, or here, or here, or here. I can go wherever I want. And most guitar players are okay with that, but as soon as the modes begin, then they feel like they have to be locked into a certain place on the guitar, and that's not true. Okay? Here's the second big confusion for guitar players where they go down really crazy rabbit holes. Let's go back to a very simple example. I'm going to go back to the key of C here. C, F, and G. So playing a simple 1-4-5 that you've probably done a million times. C, F, G, and C, right? So you go to solo over the top of that. What are you going to do? Whatever, right? Maybe you emphasize some stuff on the C and the F chord comes up. G comes up. Whatever, right? And then back to C. You know, whatever it is you're going to do. It doesn't make any difference. The point is that here's where the confusion happens is players will get so deep that they'll go, okay, well, over the C chord, I'm technically in C Ionian, but then here comes that F chord, so now I'm technically in F Lydian, and here comes that G chord. Now I'm technically in G Mixolydian, and I got to move over here. Before you learned anything about modes, you never even thought about it that way. You just played the scale, and if you were doing things more correctly, you would be outlining the chords as they come up. So when the F chord came up, you just thought of it as the 4 chord in the key of C, and you would emphasize, right, or whatever, and then G comes up, whatever it is you like to do, okay? But you weren't like confusing yourself by going, oh, now I'm in Lydian, and now I'm in Mixolydian, and now I'm in whatever. No, you're not, okay? You're not in control of that. The chord progression is in control of that. There's a great, I don't know where it is, but there's a great discussion by Joe Satriani on this, where guitar players get so lost in this, they forget that they're not defining all of those sorts of things. The rhythm section is defining all of that. This chord progression is in the key of C. The F is simply a chord in the key of C. The G is simply a chord in the key of C. It's not like when I go from C to the chord F, now all of a sudden the entire world is Lydian, and then I go to the G chord and the entire world is G Mixolydian now. It's not, okay? And if you try and think of it that way, you're just getting lost in the weeds, okay? It is okay to think that if you're in the key of C and it goes to an F, you as a soloist might try and emphasize something of that F chord, make a connection to that chord. You should be doing that. And a G chord comes up and you make a connection. And if we wanted to, again, argue semantics, maybe in that realm, we are playing F Lydian and G Mixolydian. Maybe that's true. But that's a hypothetical. It doesn't change anything. Again, it just makes everything more complicating to think of it that way. Doesn't mean you can't think of it that way. But it's not making anything better by thinking it that way. It's just making it more confusing for most people. So that's the next thing you want to be careful of. Okay? All right, so let's do another example. Let's say, for instance, I'm going to show you how I would approach something like this. Let's say we were going to be in Dorian, okay? So I'm going to be in the key of G major for this example, okay? So G major, I'm going to use A minor. So that's the chord I'm going to emphasize for my rhythm. So A minor, and I'm going to do something like this. Okay, so I'm going to go... Okay, so that's my rhythm. So what I would do is I would look at that and I would go, oh, okay, so I'm using the A minor and the D major. Looks like I'm in the key of G major using the 2 and the 5. That's what I'm doing. Okay, so now I'm going to solo over the top of this. Again, I don't think to myself, I have to go here to this position and solo. I can if I want to, and I might do that because I'm so used to, pentatonic, maybe going to that position. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I really am in the key of G major, so I could go maybe up there, or maybe in here, right? I mean, I could go wherever I want. So when this is being played, I don't have to be here. I can be here, but I could be up here. Or maybe I'm up here. I mean, I could go wherever I want. It's entirely up to me. Maybe I use some chromatics in my plan. I mean, there's a million different things I could do, right? There's all kinds of different stuff. But the point is that I'm not locked into a certain position, okay? And when it goes to this chord, which is the 5 chord in the key of G, it doesn't all of a sudden mean I'm in a different mode. It means I'm using a different chord in the key of G when I was emphasizing this too. So I'm in A Dorian, right? And if I'm in A Dorian, I might think of this chord as being the 1 chord, right? Instead of G, I might think of this as being the 1, which is something you can certainly learn to do, which means then if I'm looking at it as this is the 1 chord, this would be the 4 chord then, okay? But it's kind of semantics again. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change what notes I'm playing or what chords are available to me when I go to play over the top of this. Right? Whatever it would do. So hopefully that kind of makes sense, all right? So modes are really just being in a major key, but we're emphasizing some other chord in that key. We used to be able to say major and minor, which referred to 1 and 6, but once we started talking about the 2 or the 3 or the 4 or the 5, we couldn't use those generic terms anymore. So we had to come up with some other terms, okay? Now again, all of the discussions that I've given you in this video can be discussed and explored way, way, way further. And if you're interested, I would strongly encourage you to do so, okay? But this is a great place to start to try and get your brain wrapped around what a mode is and how to get started with this sort of thing. And then you can start asking questions, and those questions might lead to different sorts of, study, which I think is wonderful, right? So take care. Stay positive, and I'll talk to you soon, okay? If you like this, do me a favor. Like, share, certainly subscribe. And if you're looking for any kind of lesson materials, obviously they're available out here on social media, but you can always head over to GuitarZoom.com and check out our all-access membership where you get all of my guitar courses, all of my VIP videos, all of that kind of stuff to help you along your guitar journey. So take care, stay positive, and I'll talk to you soon.